Early this year, I was invited to speak on a panel to address the Law Students Society's Social Justice Committee of ANU, with MLA Linda Burney and Asmi Wood, Senior Lecturer in Law. I spoke. I don't actually smoke. I spoke as a campaigner against family violence. I'd argued that traditional culture had to be taken into account when addressing underlying factors to family violence. Linda Burney scoffed at my claims that traditional culture played a significant role and then continued to push the usual rhetoric about colonisation and dispossession. I stood by my claims that I know my language and culture and therefore had the right to speak on the issue. Burney, not surprisingly, then pulled the identity politics card and reminded the audience that Aboriginal people came in all shades of colours and backgrounds, and that not having language or culture does not make a person less Aboriginal. She did not understand that our country's most marginalised citizens are people of full descent. Their first language is not English, and their culture, or a dysfunctional version of it, is still intact. And that some of us, like she and I, are doing a hell of a lot better. So it is therefore our duty to recognise the underlying contributions of our culture to the perpetuation of family violence in order to find the real solutions to the problem. This is what is happening all over Australia. The gap isn't in between Indigenous Australia and non-Indigenous Australia. It is between the marginalised and the privileged, Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal. To me, Aboriginal people are those who I know who have no other ancestry other than Aboriginal, whose first language is not English. I learnt this from my Warrpiri family. My mother's people are honest. They use the words yappa, yapanyerni, karia, and yapagaji. Yappa is human being as opposed to non-human. Now it more commonly means Aboriginal. Yapanyerni means really Aboriginal or Aboriginal person of full descent. Yapagaji is the Warripirized version of half-caste. It means person of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal descent. Karia means white fella. These terms are used about culture as well as race. So we often hear people saying things like Yappa way or Karia way. Because half-caste has been used in blatantly racist ways, and because the national debate is dominated by people of mixed descent who identify with only their Indigenous ancestors, it is considered by many in the coastal cities to be offensive and unacceptable. I am really proud of my mixed heritage, and I'm annoyed that there is no better simple English word available that applies to me. Yapagaji is not inherently pejorative. It refers to a biological fact. A person can be Yapagaji and fully, culturally and linguistically Warrpiri. They always recognise and celebrate kin relations between Yapanyerni and Yapagaji, and with Karia, like my father and my husband. So, Ngaituru Yapagaji. I am Yapagaji and proud. The political campaigns are run from the coastal cities. All political campaigns tolerate only one version of a story. City-based activists are much more interested in demonising white fellas than in solving problems. The only black deaths that matter to them are the ones caused by white fellas, and preferably in uniform. They have nothing to say about the deaths of Aboriginal women at the hands of their men. They are outraged by the rate of Indigenous incarceration, but have nothing to say about the fact that the great majority of Indigenous offenders incarcerated were convicted of major crimes of violence against their own people. Their version of the stolen generation will not tolerate the fact that the lives of some of these children, not all, were saved because they were taken away, and their descendants now run all of the organisations and the political agenda because of the education and jobs they received, while those that were not taken away are left behind in remote communities and town camps with very little education or meaningful access to the economy. My mother says that the urban activists have a Disneyland view of Aboriginal culture, so they cannot come up with an answer to the gross abuse and neglect of too many Aboriginal kids within their own communities and families. They have to blame white fellas rather than the actual perpetrators and refuse to accept that those kids now need to be rescued from the culture of alcoholism and violence that they are caught in. The urban activists will use whatever means possible to shut down debate and stifle the expression of views they disagree with. They put much more effort into shutting down Aboriginal voices that don't conform to their agenda than to those of whitefellas. An invitation to my mother when she was an NT-MLA to speak to Indigenous students at Griffith University was withdrawn in 2013 because her views conflicted with those of too many of the staff and students. I and other Aboriginal people, like Anthony Dillon, Warren Mundine, whose views I share are routinely vilified all over social media. I've received more than one death threat. In fact, I've received many. And the Greens have taken up this agenda. When Pilbara elders, desperate to end the epidemic of grog-fueled violence in their towns, went to Canberra to talk to politicians, well, the Greens couldn't even bring themselves to walk down the corridor to meet them. These people don't seek the truth. They perpetuate myths, like Aboriginal people are more likely to die in custody than non-Aboriginal people. In his book, Arresting Incarceration, Don Weatherburn, the director of the New South Wales Bureau of Crime Statistics, reminds us that the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody revealed that Aboriginal people were no more likely to die in custody than non-Aboriginal people. The higher rate of Aboriginal deaths in custody was almost entirely explained to the overrepresentation of Aboriginal people in custody. He debunks the myth that higher rates of incarceration of Aboriginal people are due to racial bias within the system. He writes, once crucial sentencing factors are held constant, especially current and past offending, sentencing outcomes for Indigenous and non-Indigenous offenders either achieve parity or the gap is evidence to suggest that Indigenous defendants are at times treated leniently in comparison with their non-Indigenous counterparts. In our experience, this is most likely to happen when both the perpetrator and victim of violent crime are Aboriginal. It is important to understand the level of complexity of all this when dealing with Aboriginal issues and also the way in which policies are created and funding is distributed. We have seen a rapid increase in the number of people who now claim Aboriginality. They are an extraordinarily diverse group. If we collected statistics on the basis of first language rather than on the basis of claimed ethnicity, then it would be much more obvious where the biggest problems are. However, the most pressing need is to give dissenting voices from within Aboriginal communities the chance to be heard. This applies mostly to the voices of the most marginalised, the women and children. But it also applies to those most courageous of our men who are sick and tired of visiting hospitals and jails to meet up with family members, both victims and perpetrators, and who are sick of burying our children. We want to keep our women and our kids out of hospitals and our young men out of jails and everybody out of premature graves. We won't be able to do that without hearing the cries for help and ignoring the ideologically driven nonsense from those who refuse to see the truth and who don't suffer the problems. Identity politics is a distraction from the critical issues. Identity politics does not solve problems or save lives. Identity politics drives wedges between us and instead of uniting us for a stronger Australia. Those suffering in remote communities are not concerned with how proud a Warrabri or how proud a Bittinjara or how proud a Lurja they are. They are simply trying to exist in the world, and simply existing, in my view, is not good enough, as they should be free like the rest of us to thrive and flourish as proud Australians. I want to end with a quote from an Aboriginal man, Waverley Stanley from Queensland. "We may not agree on everything, but we can agree on this," he said. "There's no black and white in my eyes, even though we come from different backgrounds. It's just a love story about two people coming together with a united goal to make a difference." Identity politics aims at dividing us. That's why it only creates and doesn't solve problems. We will only start to solve the big problems if we are prepared to do it together.